Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining.
Wait a few minutes before we start. Okay. So let's start. So welcome. My name is Yves and I will be hosting the first part of this event. It's a great honor and pleasure to launch a system innovation Geneva Hub. Firstly, I want to thank all of you for attending this webinar. For those unable to join this event, it will be recorded and available on our YouTube channel. Before starting, I will briefly introduce myself. My background is in finance, in traditional finance and economy, and after many years of questioning and frustration to find coherent answer to the traditional neoclassical model, to the very limitation of this model versus the empirical observation, that this time is different. What does that mean? This boom and bust, the financial crisis. I moved gradually to understand and integrating system thinking and system innovation. It was an important step in my journey to better understand this world, and the System Innovation Hub, a tool to fill the knowledge gap and bring together our communities. That was an important step of myself. So welcome again for those who just have joined. A couple of logistics. As this is not a lot now, but a relatively large group, thank you to stay muted during the different presentation. But please use and abuse of the chat for any remark, question, and raise your hand in the chat as a Q&A session. We will be using a Metimeter. Kevin will give more detail just before launching the question. So a quick overview to what we will present today, the agenda. So there will be a 15-minute overview of the hub. Then Bowen will introduce an overview of the system innovation. Andrew will give some example and meet Switzerland system practitioner. And then we will stay with where to from here on the Q&A session. I will now present the Geneva team. So Bowen is a tech analyst and a community developer at System Innovation, exploring the bridge between technology, business, and social good. Andrew is partner in the Social Complexity Lab Geneva and mentor at the Edge Collab, working with different stakeholders to identify innovation and adoption of mutually enriching human and natural systems. Kevin is a designer and strategist in the tech banking industry and part of the design, critical thinking, and product innovation community. And Michaela is a biomimicry practitioner and bio-infused communication as well as complexity enthusiast. Biomimicry is very interesting for different reasons, especially for myself, which is working on nature-based solution and impact, because it's a practice that learns from man and mimics the strategy found in nature to solve human design challenge. And Michaela is, of course, on the call, and if you have specific questions on that specific issue, she will be very happy to explain what in better details than myself. So now we can briefly introduce what the System Innovation Hub is. So we are an e-learning and collaborative platform with mission to increase the capacity of individual and organization to do system level innovation. So a network, yes, a network of local community for e-learning about and doing system innovation, shared learning. So it's education plus tool plus community. So maybe some number now about what, as of today, as of today, there is 20 globally hub across different regions. And Geneva, last week there was London, Geneva, and there will become more coming, but it's already a good community. And some number about the people behind this community. So in the reverse order, that's good. So there is 7,000 website members, 20 hubs, as I said, 100,000 monthly users, and already 6 million video views. There is a huge amount of video learning, very interesting stuff on the web, on the YouTube channel. So what we envision our hub to be. So it's important on three dimensions. First, it's a space for learning and knowledge sharing, to explore new ideas and think creatively about how to meet the challenge the region faces. Second, it's a community that will drive greater awareness of this new area and build the capacity of the member and practice. So learning and the community. On the next point, a space for creating. So new collaboration and developing a local ecosystem of system innovator. So these three dimensions are very important. The next part. So as I mentioned, learning, connecting, and creating. But the next step to that, it's not only learning, but we will see on the next step. It's also a community of learning and a lab for experimenting. So very important, learning plus doing. So that's a very brief introduction of what the hub is, what the team. Now I will handle the macro to Kevin that will explain how we start the Mentimeter and we continue the journey.
Yeah, thank you very much. So I will share with you so you can either try to, to copy. I'm sorry, I'm going too fast here. We are. So I will copy the link to the Mentimeter and in the chat so you can directly access it. And so we ask you two small questions. The first one is, how well do you know system thinking? I will, sorry. So you should see the question. Do you still see my screen? I'm not sure. Okay.
Yeah, we see.
Okay. Okay, thank you. So we already have answers coming. So very little, very well, fairly well. Use it at work. Okay. So this is interesting.
And if the question is, if the term systems thinking is not that familiar and you haven't really come across it before, that's totally fine. It would probably be, it's quite new to you and you don't have a lot of past knowledge on that. It's totally fine.
Yeah, so I will move to the second question. So with the same link, you should see now this question. So what area are you interested in? What we mean by area can be financial sector, for instance, climate change, or urban mobility, stuff like that. So don't hesitate to add your own area of interest in this system thinking, broad definition of system thinking. Design and innovation, climate change, healthcare innovation, changing systems, sustainable digital ecosystems. Very interesting. Okay. So, yeah, thank you very much for your participation. I will probably, I don't know if anyone want to say anything at this point on your side. Guys? No? It's really interesting to see that it's on broad and diverse topics. I will come back to the slides, sorry. So don't hesitate to continue answering the question if you have more things to say.
Okay, lovely. Yeah, thanks for that input. So yeah, in this section, I'm going to talk a bit about why we need systems innovation and what we mean by the term. So if you go to the next slide, Kevin. So we can start off with a definition. So this is taken from the systems innovation, the content from the SI website. So this says that system can be understood as a combination of systems thinking and the process of innovation so as to enable transformative change within a complex system. So there's a couple of things that really stand out there as systems thinking, innovation, and transformative change within complexity. But I think to appreciate this more, let's first kind of zoom out and have a look at an example. So when we look at how we as a civilization have evolved from more localized tribes to the invention of the first more advanced transport systems, such as the railway network, to where we are now with these large, dense metropolises with globally interconnected supply chains, I think one thing that becomes clear is that we're becoming increasingly interconnected. And with this increasing interconnection, we can call this a rise of complexity. And this is what happens when you have many elements which are becoming more interconnected and interdependent. And when this happens on a larger scale, it can lead to very unpredictable emergent outcomes. I mean, an example of this is with the butterfly effect, where the flapping of a butterfly's wings on a large enough time span can have quite a big impact outside of that sphere. And so this trend as well of rising complexity seems to be increasing over time as well, due to the effects of globalization and information technology, just to name a couple of examples. And this increasing interconnectedness leads to a lot of good things. Like, for example, I'm based in Switzerland, and here we can go to any supermarket and buy all sorts of exotic things like avocados. But it also means that problems can emerge which are built on top of this kind of complex interconnected web, which become very, very difficult to address and many times difficult to even identify or understand. One good example of this is looking at the pandemic and where we find ourselves today, where a problem which was started off quite local really came to impact the world in very profound ways. And this is, of course, something that not one person or one organization or even one government can address on their own. So yeah, I'd love to kind of just open this up a little bit now and just ask if you wanted to type in the chat an example of a wicked problem that comes to mind, or if you wanted to unmute yourself, you can feel free and you can say, an example of one problem and why you believe it's a wicked problem. If anybody wants to chip in. Feel free to just unmute yourself, by the way. So one example of a problem and why you think it's a wicked problem. I can start. Like, one that comes to mind quite often is like 2008, the financial crisis, where we have, certain innovations, let's say, in products which can, when something falls apart in one side of the financial system, it just kind of has a knock-on effect and affects so many parts of society. I can see a few comments here in the chat. We've got COVID, of course, we've got climate change. That's a classic example. Rising inequality, internet democracy, civil war, and misinformation. Okay, brilliant. Thanks for that. I think we can move then on to the next slide. And so as we can see with some of these problems that we've looked at, they're highly complex in nature and they're unstructured, they're open-ended. There's lots of different dimensions to them, and they can often have no known solution, which of course makes them difficult. If you go to the next slide, Kevin. And here are a few examples of wicked problems, many of which we've already touched upon. Go to the next slide. And what this increasingly means is that when we look at these types of complex problems and we try to solve them in the same ways that we've solved problems in the past, in a more linear kind of A causes B fashion, we can find that it increasingly is not fit for purpose. And what these new types of challenges require is new ways of being and acting, which is much more in touch with this new reality we face. And this really starts with a systemic awareness. Really help support us here is the field of systems thinking, which can help us to appreciate this complexity that we face and work with it. And also realize that systems change can't be done alone and really requires the coming together of many diverse viewpoints and perspectives in order to gain a more complete picture of what's really happening and acting from that collective vantage point. And if anybody's kind of interested in exploring systems thinking more, or would like an introduction or kind of its application in different areas, then as many of you might have already tried out the Systems Innovation website, there's a lot of that, which kind of quite distills some of the concepts in quite easy to approach language. Okay, brilliant. And so to kind of sum up and go back to the definition, we can see here that to face up against these so-called wicked problems that we face today, we need, of course, action and change. So this is the innovation part, but not only in the parts, it requires taking a more holistic view, which can be supported by systems thinking, to change the underlying structures that give rise to these problems that we see, as well as changing how we organize ourselves to address these problems. And on that note, I'll hand over to Andrew to talk about some examples of systems innovation.
Good. Thank you, Bowen. Hi, everyone. I'm Andrew Crosby. Good to see so many people here. Yeah, we have these things in Social Complexity Lab, where I'm associated with as a partner, and Hatch CoLab as well. And my guess is, even if you're not that familiar with systems thinking per se, this is all familiar stuff. So now I get to take you through a little bit, just some like some metaphors and some examples. So, and then we'll get to hear from some of the people who are here, because I know that there are a lot of people here, in addition to those who we've asked to speak, who have some really interesting takes, even just based on what I saw in the chat already. So basic metaphor, iceberg works pretty well. Just things that we see happening around us is just kind of amplifying what Bowen just said, are the result of patterns of behavior, systemic structures, and mental models. And you know, if we want to understand what's happening on the surface, we might be well served by understanding some of these underlying patterns, systems, and models. Similarly, if we want to change things in systems, we might be well served by trying to intervene. Although, as somebody who's worked in policy knows, we know that it has a huge amount of potential leverage. It's a lot harder to influence. So there are different challenges at different levels. Next slide, please. And let's go through, let's get the other images there too. So this is just, we're still in the habit, even, even in the world that I've been in for the last couple decades around international trade, we're still used to thinking of our car or our phone or whatever as things that get traded, even our agricultural products as things that just get traded across borders that we consume and so on. This is pretty much not the case anymore for almost everything around us. Almost all of these things are a reflection of or a product of complex systems that come together. So a car is not just a car. A car is all this hardware that gets sourced from places, software that gets sourced from other places and interacts with servers and so on in other places. So next slide. So just as I was saying, things like manufacturing, distributed manufacturing, globally sourced services, intellectual property, all these things are not only the reflections of complex systems, but if we want to change the way that they are affecting, for example, climate change, or whether we want to try to change economic interactions, for example, we need to understand that these are not just simple things, but they're the results of complex systems. And we have incredible, interesting kinds of disruptions that are coming down the pike. So we have things like 3D printing, which is shifting some amount of power, potentially shifting some amount of power directly to individuals who want to produce things. You have things like the maker movement, which is fascinating, with people building machines and projects all on their own, sending plans back and forth. It's completely outside of our dominant manufacturing system. Next slide. And probably closer to home for some people here. No nice little clip art actually, but you get the idea. So if you're working on hunger or violence, rarely can you just focus on feeding people. It's not enough, or stopping violence. They're interlinked with infrastructure or with employment or with trade. And they get solved not only at this, sort of the aggregate level, but they get solved by understanding what people do at the household level. How do they respond to different sorts of interventions and constraints? Next slide. So there are a lot of organizations. Probably most of us here are dealing with complexity and systems in some way. But let me give you a couple of examples of organizations that you've probably heard of, that you may know about. One is a Forum for the Future. It's been doing work in this area, multi-stakeholder work to do systems intervention and innovation. So if I took one example of their work on regenerative agriculture, next slide, please. Just to give you an example. So this is a mapping exercise. It's kind of what it could look like. One way it could look. This is kind of a nice example. Sorry, you might not be able to see that much unless you've got a big screen, but you've got 3 bands here. One that deals with the lower band, niche, and then regime, and then landscape. So they've divided, the field in these areas, and then looked at where there are blockages in respect to regenerative agriculture, how to make regenerative agriculture work. And then they took another nice step, which is on the next slide, and they kept the same organization, but they started mapping. So how do we start to build bridges between these levels to create some kind of system change? And it's kind of a nice diagram, I think, just in how you can go from looking at what is to trying to model what you might, what might be, and what would that look like in terms of intervention. So next slide, please. So then there's UNDP, and you people probably, well, everyone's probably familiar with UNDP. They have the learning, the accelerator labs, which are all over the world. You can see 78 countries, and they're taking place across a huge range of issues involving stakeholders in the countries where they're working to take new approaches, systemic approaches to problems. So they're doing, these four icons that we have here: sense making, collective intelligence, solutions mapping. They're trying to, in a way, codify different approaches in those things. So I included one on collective intelligence just to, so you could get a sense of what it looks like. Next slide. So here, here they're saying increase diversity, enable people to contribute views and ideas, integrate different types of data, be citizen-centered. So those are some principles that they're trying to incorporate into this, this collective intelligence aspect of systems innovation. Next slide. So that's enough sort of static examples. So now we get to hear from some people who are in our community who are also working on these issues. So we have Mille Boyder, who's director of Rios Partners, and Tobias Lute, who's a professor in ETH and has I haven't talked with Tobias yet, but it sounds like a fascinating project. And Zenda, who's into development evaluation, and she's a professor, and they're all three of us here on the call with us. So we've asked them to just say a little bit about themselves, their current role in organization, and why systems approaches are important for the work that they do. So if I can ask Mille to speak first, the floor is yours. Are you good? You need to be unmuted, maybe. Does that do anything?
Yes.
There you go.
I didn't have to unmute myself. Hi, Andrew. Good to see you.
Yeah,
hi,
good to
everyone.
see you.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, great. So yeah, really good to be here. Good to see this community coming together in Geneva. Andrew and I met at some point back when people were still meeting face to face. I'm not sure when it was. Time has become a bit of a strange concept now, but I'm looking forward to meeting all of you face to face at some point. So I work with Rios Partners, as Andrew mentioned. I lead the Europe team of Rios. We have about 60 people around the world. We're basically specialized in multi-stakeholder collaboration around complex social issues. So I've been working on what you call wicked problems for about 20 years in many different sectors. And what we bring is really the kind of the process, the experience of how to convene multi-stakeholder groups, diverse groups of people who are not necessarily used to coming together, who are maybe from different silos or from opposing perspectives, and to help them to collaborate around systemic issues. And so I think systems innovation is very important because it's very much what I work with. I was thinking a little bit about this this afternoon, and I think where our work is maybe interesting, or what's an interesting angle on this that builds on what you've just said, is the people aspect. So what we do is we bring together these microcosms of the system in the sense of these whole system teams. And I think that sometimes is the people aspect of this is sometimes overlooked in all the systems maps. It sort of gives the impression that you can map the system from the outside and then identify places to intervene, and then you intervene there and you influence the whole. But the experience of bringing people from across a system together who are acting and having different experiences in different parts of that system, and who are interdependent because no one actor can solve this problem on their own, and then helping them together to see their system, to understand where it's healthy, where it's dysfunctional, what's its context, what are the relationships, what are the structures and the mental models, as you just said with the iceberg, and then identifying the places where change is required, the solutions that are needed, the innovations that are needed, and then forming teams to work on those. That's the work that we do, but it's very relational. It's very much about people's mindsets. It's very much about trying to help systems to change from within, and people to understand their place in the system and how the work that they do influences other parts of the system. And when you sit down, so we've done work, for example, around sustainable fashion in Brazil, or the sustainable food system, or the education system. And when when a Bolivian seamstress in Brazil sits down with the CEO of a retailer, there's like a showing up of the system in the room, that you understand the implications of what's happening on your part of the system on the others, and that relationship is built, and then those relationships can be sustained over time, so that you can call up the person on the other part, in the other part of the system, and find out how they see something, or how they understand the implications of what's happening in your part of the system. And so I think these kinds of the relationships that are built in these cross-system teams, and all of us, I think, can actively build relationships with, if we think about the systems that we're a part of, how can we build relationships with other parts of the system, and then how do we build that collaborative capability in that system. So I think of it almost like creating a level of agency that's at the system level. We know we have agency as individuals, we know we have agency as organizations, but when you form a whole system team, you sort of create agency at the level of the system as well. You create capability at the level of the system, and you create kind of relationships at the level of the system, so that if you take the example of the sustainable fashion system in Brazil, we bring together the retailers, the cotton farmers, the seamstress cooperatives, the unions, and all these different actors that are part of that sustainable fashion system. And it creates an identity of we, the system, and how are we going to change as a system? How are we going to become a force for good as a system? And it's a level of agency that didn't exist before, because you create a team at that level of the system. So I find that really exciting. But it involves a lot of human dynamics that are often missing from the system maps. And I think that's important to remember, that systems are also conflictual. They're also, messy in all the ways that human dynamics are messy. So maybe that's what I'll say for now. Of course, there's lots to be said about this. This has been my work for over 15 years, so I'm hoping to explore more with all of you.
Great, thank you. I mean, I love the point, just the human elements, but also I guess maybe this, the situations you're describing, you don't just jump into systems, it's more experiential, right? It's relational. You don't go into systems mapping right away, do you? I mean, it sounds like you're describing something that's much more relational, experiential, at least to start.
Yeah, I think we look at the system. I think there are many different ways of mapping a system. One of the ways of mapping a system is to look at the actors in that system. That's just one lens on it. So I think that's the first thing that we do, is look at who are the different players in the system. Then we convene those players, and then we help those players together to map their system, which is where it gets into icebergs and causal loops and all of these things. But then they're mapping their own system, and they are part of that, and they can see how they themselves are part of the problems that are being mapped in that space, and how they can therefore be part of the solution.
Cool. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Let's move on to Tobias. Tobias, can you hear me? And actually, I don't know if you say Tobias or Tobias. You can correct me if we can get you live here.
Yes, I can hear you.
Hi, welcome.
Thank you.
Would you like to weigh in on the questions?
Yeah, sure.
I'd be happy to share your point of view. Yeah, thank you.
Right. Well, thanks for the invitation. Yeah, lived in Geneva for a while, some years ago. So I have happy that this is evolving in Geneva, in this rich social environment and the beautiful mountains around. So yeah, I'm working currently at ETH in Zurich and at the Oslo School of Architecture and Design, both in basically interesting roles. In the School of Architecture and Design, where we have a master in systems-oriented design and a new executive master in systems-oriented design, working a lot with giga mapping and these kind of things. We basically try to bring in more sustainability science in the design world. At ETH, which is engineering and science based, we're trying to bring in more design, because we know, meanwhile, that science alone, neither design alone, are adequately equipped to help to tackle these wicked problems. But at the interface of sustainability science and systemic design, we are getting closer to this transformative impact and innovation that we need. So at ETH, we're having the Systemic Design Labs initiative, currently working on PhD summer school on regenerate alpine urban circularity, happening in Real, beginning of June at the Monbise Institute. This real world laboratory, which we're building up in the Italian Piedmont Mountains. We're also working on a MOOC, on a massive open online course, designing resilient regenerative systems, starting next autumn. So it's all in this realm of systems innovation, which I would really frame between technical and social innovation. And this real world lab, Monbise Institute, is basically, let's say, a culmination of many, many years of work in different environments, where I was often frustrated that we talk so much and write so much about solutions, but we really don't get to do them fast enough and strong enough. So we need to have more than just information. We need to bring people together. We need to make it experiential. We need to illustrate. We need to work as a mountain guide part-time, so that the power of having people together involved in something, that's of course much more needed and more powerful than let's say the classic ways we do in the academic world, but to be combined. So I would say the technical part of, for example, implementing new passive house design solutions, having regional supply chains for bioregional economies, etc. That's all important, but that's all quite easy compared to implementing it in a social environment with all the kind of opposition that we face. So our work, for the second question, in the systems approaches is that we consciously experiment with how to innovate in complex systems from a resilience perspective, where systems usually open up after a kind of crisis. They reorganize themselves, and while they grow again, there's the best window for innovation. And making this placative, illustrative in a real world lab in a mountain community is very powerful and it's a lot of fun. We experiment with so-called tools for change to help implement these systems innovation in practice. And in this real world, to inform this real world tools for change, we're working with systemic design principles that inform mental models in the systems thinking world. So from the systems thinking world to the real world, where we inform mental models with design principles to practice change in the real world. That's at the core of this work, and across different governance scales. And I would love to chat about this more in another opportunity, but my 5 minutes are over, so thank you.
Thank you. I love, okay, you're coming back also to the human element. I'm just curious, have you found, like for your MOOC, does that also have this human interactive element as well? Are you sort of trying to stretch the boundaries between this formal and experiential across all of your work?
Yeah, that's the core. So in the MOOC, we work, for example, with colleague Daniel Christian Wahl, who wrote this book, Designing Regenerative Cultures. Mm-hmm. And we're looking a lot of different worldviews, which is a more question-based approach to identifying not only solutions, but pathways, since all of this systems innovation obviously has a pathway and we are working more question-based. We're identifying different types of reasoning, of knowing, including, you know, let's say non-quantitative, non-scientific knowledge. Yeah, definitely. I think we think that's at the core of advancing and yeah, bring the needed impact that we faster than we usually do.
Thank you very much. That's fantastic. And I'd like to ask a question, and I want to open the floor to Zenda, but I want to ask also a question, which is, you know, that we can address after Zenda speaks, which is just, you know, what kind of new skills do we need as humans to deal with these emergent systems? So let me park that. And thank you, Tobias. And let me ask Zenda if she could share her experience now. Can you hear me, Zenda?
Thank you. I was muted by someone else for the moment.
Okay, you're good. We can hear you.
I'm back.
Welcome.
Thank you. Thanks very much for this initiative. I think it's great, and it's great that it's in Geneva with all its many different types of organizations and interests, and also then connected to other hubs worldwide. So thank you for doing this. I'm sure it's going to be great. So I'm Zenda Ophir, obviously. I'm a South African. I'm currently based in, well, between Geneva and Lausanne in Gland, where I worked a long while ago with the World Conservation Union on knowledge management. But for the last 20 years, I've been actually in South Africa and here an evaluation specialist. I've been very privileged. I've worked in more than 40 countries from local to global level. And more recently, I'm working on the intersection of sustainable development and evaluation and transformation. So we work at the moment with global networks who are trying to to transform economies and transform ways of working and living, trying to cultivate an evaluative approach within what is being done. I've been also very engaged here in Geneva in a group of people who are very keen to have evaluative practice focused on systems and transformation embedded in the international work that's done here. And so I hope that the hub will give an opportunity to meet people with similar interests. What I would like to say, yes, and I must make this point that although I was introduced as a professor, it's quite important to me to mention that I'm actually a practitioner. I stand in practice every day, and I'm an honorary professor at a South African university, which is like a professor in practice. In other words, if they think that you have done well in a profession outside university and you can engage in the university occasionally, you may carry the title of professor. But I do deal with the reality of the world every single day in my work. And so I thought just a quick minute on evaluation, because most people, when they think of evaluation, they think of, you know, indicators, KPIs and stuff we measure, or a bunch of people who parachute down and ask some questions and at the end of a project or something. And very often the experience is not very good. But that has changed tremendously. Evaluation is a very long history. It's got, of course, about more than 1,000 years in China is the best known case of imperial examinations where evaluative practice started. But in our modern times, in 1930 or so in the US primarily, in terms of government program evaluation, and then in 1960s, aid evaluation became very popular. And that's an arena in which I've also worked, global self-development, of course, because that's my passion, together with the environment. So since the 1960s, evaluation was done to the South. And then around the 1990s, it started to take root around the world. Global platforms started to form in the 2000s. We have periods of very specific methodologies like randomized controlled trials and so on, social impact evaluation that became very prominent. And in the late 2000s, what started to become very prominent is decolonization of evaluation. So for the last 10 years, people have been trying to figure out what would evaluation have looked like if it was invented not in Europe or in America in modern times, but in the global South. And that has been making for very interesting work by indigenous societies around the world. And brought new practices to light. And in the last 5 years, with the advent of the Sustainable Development Goals, transformation and systems change has become the main focus of everything that we do. And so there are associations of evaluation professionals in about 110 countries. With 23 international and global associations of professionals around the world, and encompassing between 50,000 and 70,000 people who actually would call themselves evaluators. And people think there's like, formative or summative evaluation where you come and check up on stuff from outside in the middle of some project or program. Or at the end, but there are actually more than 80 types of different evaluations, different approaches to evaluation, and one can evaluate just about anything. And what is evaluation? It's determining the value, the worth of something from different perspectives. And from different value systems, and making some assessment of whether it is successful or not, whether it works or not, and much more importantly, how things can be improved and how it can be done in the future. So we are turning evaluation into something that is empowering for people engaged in it rather than some policing or accountability focus. It's focused on learning opportunities. And when you look at what is being evaluated today, it's far more mission fulfillment, it's systems change, it's global or regional or national strategies, of course, the SDGs and progress towards the SDGs, networks and partnerships, ecological or planetary sustainability issues, collective impact and transformational change. So those are the kinds of things that we focus on these days. There are hundreds of articles and books that are already written about systems and complexity concepts in evaluation. And remember that when we do evaluation or when we help facilitate people to learn through evaluative practice, we look at whether whatever we're looking at has been designed from a systems perspective, whether it's being implemented, usually adaptation is very important, but also whether things co-evolve, path dependence. All these concepts get built into what we do and how we think about what we evaluate. And also ourselves, as we evaluate and we support development, we are ourselves part of a system and we are changed by what we are doing. There are, just very quickly, 3 different types. Developmental evaluation is very interesting because it is entirely about learning from a systems and complexity perspective, and the evaluator becomes part of the team that's trying to effect the change and ask strategic questions and basically work all the time to bring notions of systems into and improvement into the processes. Then there's a principles-focused evaluation, which is also systems-based, but it's essentially about not evaluating the intervention or something, but the principles on which something is taking place and which is supposed to effect change. And thirdly, very lastly, and what I think is really worthwhile, because I hope many of you will be interested in these types of evaluation, is what is called blue marble evaluation. And the blue marble stems from the moonshot, or the picture of Earth that was taken from the moon. And that looks like a blue marble. And blue marble evaluation has been developed for the last 2 years. It's taken a route around the world of evaluation. It is the evaluation of global systems and evaluation from a global systems perspective, global to local though, based on 16 different principles that we apply when we look through that kind of lens. So the bottom line is evaluation uses and has to use a lot of systems thinking and a lot of work with complexity concepts, but it is very, very challenging to implement. And so we really need a lot of innovation in our space and in the spaces in which we apply, which is obviously social innovation and also technological and other forms of innovation. Thanks.
Good, thank you. Again, the humanities popping up. I love this. I've got just one little follow-up for you, and then I want people to also be, to the extent you like, put your questions. I see a few questions already in the chat, and if you'd like to speak and share your own experience, it can be questions or just share your own experience. But I'm just curious with you, Zenda, because I've worked also around evaluation a lot. To what extent do you find systemic resistance amongst those who are, how much do you run into the traditional, evaluation system as a barrier to carrying forth some of these innovations in evaluation? Let's see, how do we unmute her?
Thank you for allowing me.
No.
Yeah, I mean, it's a very pertinent issue. We deal a lot with governments, and a lot of government officials are very uncomfortable because, of course, a lot of activities take place in silos. But quite a number of governments have started to work on systems and complexity informed.
Okay, is Zenda frozen just for me or for others?
For me as well.
Yeah, me too.
Okay. Let's see if she comes back.
I'm back. Yes, I've no idea.
Okay.
Just a concluding sentence. It's not so much the resistance, I think, like an active resistance. I think people are very uncertain. They're not used to systems concepts, and they're very uncertain about how to shift from results-based management, which is very much focused on rigid, predict in 5 years from now what your indicators will produce and what will your products be like and what will the outcomes be like. And in very linear fashion style thinking, they don't know how to move from that into a completely different frame, which is, adapting as you go along, being much more comfortable with the uncertainties that one has to deal with. And this is very, very important when you deal, for example, with development in the global south, where everything is highly complex and very unpredictable. There's no recipe for anything. So it's more a matter of discomfort, of facilitating, guiding, helping to build capacities. But despite that, it's going to take a lot of time. And in the meantime, a lot of damage is done by old practices that are completely destructive. As evaluators, we see the destruction that linear thinking and results-based, rigid results-based work has been doing, and not thinking about interconnections. So people develop a little thing somewhere without thinking at all of the systems within which the development will be supported. A typical example is a little industry, but there's no market, there's no road to the market, there is no bargaining power and so forth. So the destructive nature of what takes place without systems thinking has been well researched and really needs to be very well attended to if we want to have very, very good results in future. Countries that have successfully developed, like China, for example, have based their development almost entirely on systems and complexity concepts. So we have much to learn from that.
Good. Thank you. The three of you have just done a brilliant job in demonstrating, I think, how we're at a major inflection point in areas of our lives. You've covered a huge range of things where we're at this inflection point that we need new skills, and we've got a lot of learning, and as the negative things on one side make them positive things on another in terms of potential. So now, so I would like to, I see a few questions. Thank you, Zenda, by the way, thank you. So I see a few questions, and maybe my colleagues may be able to help me pick up some of those questions, but it's not only questions. I would love to hear from anyone, raise your hand and contribute your own area of work for a minute or so. If you'd like to do that. So I'm going to just leave the floor open for a second and see if I get anyone to raise their hand. And then I'm going to pick up some questions. So I'll give everyone a minute or 30 seconds, see if anyone wants to raise their hand and just weigh in on how they're dealing with this system complexity and innovation in their area. Okay, so I'll look for a raised hand for 30. You see one?
See that, Andreas? You have your hand up.
Great. Let's hear from Andreas.
I think, are you able to unmute yourself? Let's try this again. I think I've disabled the setting.
Oh, okay, good.
Okay, great.
So,
hi, welcome.
Hi. My name is Andreas Cironemi. I'm from St. Gallen University, and I'm also working as a consultant. I found that really interesting. I participated in the meeting from Systems Innovation in London, and I'm glad to see that in Switzerland happening. So with all what I see is, I think there's a tremendous effort. There's many people in different areas. Sometimes I'm asked myself, if this is so interesting, if people are here and want to do more, why is not more happening? And obviously, I think it's also has to do with patience, so that we are used as a culture to deal with language 2000 years. We're used to do with mathematics some 100 years. And visualization that many system thinkers use were either painters or architects. You build something, or it should be nice looking. And using visualization as a thinking tool is quite new and has not an elaborate practice in business and academia. So I think this is one of the reasons why sometimes the funding is difficult, that it isn't either language nor a typical mathematical part. I just would like to open the floor also to others, like if it's useful, as many say here, why does it have a hard stand to get funding?
Great questions. Anyone want to?
Well, maybe I will do, because I started from finance and moving to system innovation. And I think, as you mentioned, the first hurdle was the taxonomy. I think how to understand what we're going. So I started now 2 years. I started in the first event in Barcelona, in London. The first time it was another planet. So I think to understand and to change from one linear thinking to something embedding different domain expertise, understanding taxonomy, and then to implement and having use case, because I think what is missing is use case, also to see the confrontation of different people and finding solutions, the mapping, the design. I think everything, because there is one camp that the purists, that they know what they don't understand because they are working in this environment, and there's the rest of the world. And the bridge between the two is a very missing piece. And when we will have use case, true use case, and bringing this domain expertise, we will find solution. And I think we mentioned today climate change, big challenge. And I think from first finance, the bridge is impact investing. Impact investing is minimum for impact investing is to have an understanding about what's going on, having the causality, having the lag, understand what's the truth behind. So we need system thinker and system innovator to map and to avoid greenwashing. So for me, in finance, it was the natural link is moving from traditional finance to moving from risk return impact, and from impact integrating different people, different domain expertise, and of course a community like System Innovation. It's a game changer for people in finance.
Joss, I can see you have your hand raised as well.
I think we have an evaluation problem in systems thinking, actually. How do you evaluate how far we are with this area of systems thinking? Actually, it's not that easy when you think about all the areas and all the related areas across academia, across practice, and people doing stuff out there in the world. I've tried to think about, where are we? Are we making progress? Is this becoming more popular, or what's the situation? And it's very difficult actually to assess that. You focused it on funding, Andreas. Is that specifically what you're interested in, or was it generally like, are these ideas gaining ground, or was it just, are people more willing to fund it?
So it's both. I think it's changing now, but I mean, many of the systems thought have been out in the 80s. 70s, 80s, core concepts were built. So what happened 90, 2000? And I think right now with just more adoption of internet, of collaboration online, it could be that these knowledge hubs in several areas are easier connecting. Because it's typically in education, not a stream. So which university has systems thinking as a subject or as a major? Most don't. Yeah. So getting these people in different areas together is something that was missing, that other subjects or topics usually have. So it's the funding, but also the getting the knowledge and the cases together.
Yeah, maybe I could just follow up quickly, because actually at that conference in London, right, we had a gentleman who's a professor for systems at the Open University, and I interviewed him. Name's just gone off the top of my head now, but I'll come back to me. He's been in the business Ray Eisen. Yeah, he's been in the business of systems thinking for like 40 years, teaching this or something around that time. And I asked him that question, right? How are we making progress? What's the situation here? And he said, academia, as you said, has been very resistant to this, actually. And I'd imagine you understand, some of the reasons of that, since you've been in that business for a while. Particularly, he noted the siloed nature of academia, right? You're in physics, you're in philosophy, you're in whatever, and systems thinking is not that, it's cutting across it, right? So, and he said, yeah, it's a kind of stalled project to some extent, the systems thinking in academia, trying to introduce it, right? And I think it is. But he also noted that a lot of the innovation in this is actually happening outside academia, more in what you just mentioned there, hubs and labs and systems change stuff, and the kind of organizations that Andrew just pointed to, Forum for the Future, and practitioners, really, people doing stuff with these ideas. But I'd also say it's coming in the form, not under the name of systems thinking or complexity or any of this stuff. If you think about that idea of ecosystem, right, in business, that's really risen to fame. That's a systems thinking concept, right? Thinking in ecosystems, and that didn't really exist 40 years ago. We're all thinking competition and rational agents and markets and everything, and now they're talking about ecosystems. So it doesn't, a lot of stuff. I think there are a lot of ideas that are systems thinking ideas are rising to prominence generally without, having that name on them. So again, it's difficult to kind of measure it, but that would be my thinking on it. Yeah.
One of the applications that I find really interesting, real world, is the way that some governments have dealt with the need to think integratively about digital economy issues, including trade and others. And some governments have actually gone to the extent of combining or creating ministries like that would cross over and really capture the digital transformation aspects across a range of ministries. So I mean, that's a real world example, and I don't think it's easy to do. I think it's really difficult for us to do. Can anyone have more comments? Want to raise their hand, weigh in on this or another topic? No.
I'll add specifically to what you said there. If you think about like the C-suite in corporations, if you used just to have the different verticals, finance and so on and so forth, and now you got things like chief customer officer, chief innovation officer, and all of this, chief diversity officer and stuff like that. They're actually cross-cutting things across the enterprise instead of those vertical things. So I think those are examples, right? I think across all organizations, we're increasingly facing complexity. Some people resist that, but there will be a percentage that kind of embrace that and move forwards, whether they're aware of it or not. They're going to introduce new ways of thinking, new ways of doing things to respond to at least some of them.
Yeah, good comment, Malcolm. And then I see Yves got his hand up also.
Just pinpoint to what you said about digitalization, and I think one missing part also was that the progress in technology makes things much easier for integrating collective intelligence. And I think the new technologies, the blockchain, whatever, now there is a fight between centralization and decentralization. And through the monitoring and the true transparency of the process, then we can improve the asymmetry of information. And through that, we can also solve different problems and different domain expertise in different areas. So I think technology make a huge leverage point about how to bring people together, and also not only human, but machine, the intelligent artificial, and maybe also nature, what nature can give some example about these three parties of the world. I think it's a three-part: people, machine, and nature.
Good, thank you. Malcolm, you got the floor.
Yeah, sorry. I just wanted, I'd worked with some people recently using, I don't know if you're familiar with open source intelligence and what they call alternative data and domain analysis. And I saw some really kind of incredible results. I mean, I'm not an expert, but they had an example, somebody I think mentioned the financial crisis, but they did a kind of a retro, a retro example where they tried to predict using information from 2017-19. They did a very simple kind of analysis of newspaper stories, and they produced like the likelihood of a pandemic came up as one of the most likely risks. But then they compared that to what the risk, the top management consultants, Bain and McKinsey and BCG had predicted at the time. None of them had put the pandemic as a major risk, but this sort of system analysis, and it's all kind of basic tools which are in the public domain, could predict this within 30 minutes. And I just think, there's so many kind of, a lot of the trends and the risks and the trends that we don't see coming, they are the worst ones. They're often the ones that we don't predict: the financial crisis, the COVID, and whatever there are. These are the ones which are most disruptive because we're not ready for them. So if you could use tools and find ways of predicting that, that would be a hugely valuable tool that business would like, and business would invest in, and business would then go into sponsorship with universities also to support these kind of research. Because I think the value of, we don't need to sort of remind ourselves what this has cost us. The COVID and financial crisis was another one, and these were predictable crises, but we missed them.
Mm-hmm. Good, thank you. I see Bowen has his hand up.
Yeah, that's super fascinating what you brought up there, Malcolm. And I think what you touched upon there is, one thing we hear a lot about these days is on the topic of decentralization. In organizations, the blockchain is kind of like a massive fad there. And I remember I was watching this video on systems thinking, which I think Josh produced, which I really loved, which is kind of one of the biggest downfalls of having this traditionally hierarchically organized system, which when we are dealing with somewhat complex issues that requires a high level of output and kind of collective coordination, this is generally like the best approach that we have consistently, scalably been able to implement for kind of organizing people. And it's good at certain things like mass producing products when it's standardized and you just care about scale. But when the environment is highly variable and actually a premium goes on adaptation and what kind of signal you pick out from the noise and the ability to kind of bring this information into the central nervous system and do something with it quickly, hierarchies are absolutely terrible at that, because you've got people at the bottom feeding people to the top, and then decision take months to come down in the politics. And I think, I don't really have answers to this, but for me, this is like a really interesting space when we talk about collective intelligence and what is this kind of medium for bringing people together to work collectively that can lead to this better output.
Yeah, thank you. Let me just mention, because I see a few people have dropped off, I just want to make sure that you all know that we have a follow-up meeting on June 8th. You'll be able to see it on the LinkedIn channel. It's an introduction to systems innovation. And we've got about 20 minutes that we can continue to talk here. So the floor continues to be open. Andreas. Yeah.
Thank you. Feng Bowen just mentioned something that I think is a big opportunity right now. So it's true that systems thinking has been around since the 70s, 80s, 90s, but in that time, traditional hierarchical organizations was still like, it works. Till the financial crisis, most people said, well, maybe it's not the best way, but it works. And only after 2010, we see much more these concepts of agile organizations, design thinking approaches coming up. And before, I got the impression that people say we'd like to think more broadly, but nobody gives us time. My schedule is done that I can do my work in my compartment. That's it. Nobody has the information that we would need to put such a map out, because we don't work together in this area. And with these new agile and design-oriented approaches, that is so much coming in many organizations in the last 3 and 5 years. Just the workspace, the time, the possibility that 10 and 20 people across compartments can collaborate is much more likely. So I think there is a new chance to also adopt concepts that have been around before, but were very hard to implement in organizations.
Yeah. Yes, indeed. Yeah, Joss.
And I think also a factor in it is actually automation too, because we've spent so much of our time doing routine, predictable kind of work on factory lines and things that didn't require space, didn't require thinking about, didn't require kind of collaboration and so forth. But now, as you automate things and more people potentially have that space, those routine things are automated, that creates the space for, and you shift up the kind of value chain, right? So this is all interconnected into the transition in the economies to the information society and services economy and so forth. But I think that in itself is a deeper, more fundamental transformations that are happening that actually support this way of thinking. And I think they've really, over the past 80 years, they've really gone hand in hand, the advent of digital computing and the rise of systems thinking in a certain sense. But there's a lot of kind of fundamental changes in the economy, and I think that's one of them around automation, that you get rid of a lot of that need to do kind of the industrial age kind of time-bound, routine, predictable processes, and you shift more people into the realm of actual innovation, right, and knowledge working and so forth. And then there's a recognition that you need more space, like Google giving you your Friday to go and do what you want and invent something new. So I think there's, yeah, a whole pile of kind of aspects to that that play into it.
Oh boy, we have a lot to discuss, don't we? There's so many pieces here. Anyone else want to weigh in on anything? Yeah, Eve. Sorry if I'm missing anyone, just wave to me.
Yeah, no, it's of course. I think it's interesting because what the missing part also is that before there was the system thinking, there was people that were aware of what's going on. But what was missing is what I said before, is the technologies that we can give the monitoring of that. And the next step is that now, as we can embed externality inside the system and a better sharing revenue, there is financial market that is trying to move forward that. So in a sense, there is a last step that we can put a price of externality and improve the model. So in a sense, all steps are moving forward to hope that we improve the model. And I think every step came at the maybe too late, but at the right time now to move forward.
So one thing, I just want to flag this, because one thing that occurs to me is listening to Mille and also listening to Zenda is this experiential and also the what's happening on the ground, not, and particularly in places that don't have technology, in places where there's subsistence economy. What are the implications? I don't know if anyone has answers, but those are big questions for me. like not all of us can be in this advanced economic space. So how do we bring this to them, not just as subjects, but as participants? I see Effie has her hand up. Hi, Effie.
Hi. I'd like to add to the potential use case. I see from my experience, I'm in the fintech world deeply. And what is clear is that the entire world is rethinking the concept of money. And of course, money is so entrenched in our social life that means that we are essentially, without realizing, rethinking a lot of other values. And I'm surprised that there is no systems thinking. I don't see any systems thinking in these processes. I see old type of thinking of economics and mixed with a lot of geopolitical type of thinking that is also very traditional. So again, there I'm surprised that this hasn't penetrated, and it's I don't see why. And I'm a novice, but from just hearing what's been discussed here, it would be the perfect use case.
Good, thank you. I bet somebody else will take that up. Joss, you want to weigh in again? Yeah, I see your hand up.
Just
yeah,
unmute, Joss.
Sorry. Yeah, it's a good point, and I agree. A lot of the kind of thinking in fintech and so forth is kind of perpetuating old logic, but there is some. If you look for it, you can find some innovation there. FE, for example, Vienna University has a blockchain center. And there's token engineering groups and some of our partners who are making that connection between complexity theory and the development of these new networked economies, these token economies. So there is stuff going on there, but I agree with you. Like I'm here, the financial center is just behind me here in London, and most of the fintech stuff is just perpetuating old logic. But there is a niche there for sure. People I work quite a bit with, who are interested in how do you really take this technology and use it for its maximum potential in terms of what Eve talked about there, in terms of accounting for externalities and kind of full cost accounting. You know, we can do all this stuff with tokens and this technology now. And new evaluation systems, that actually ties into what Zenda was saying. We're going to need to have new evaluation systems for accounting for things. And then the technology to support that, and the new economic thinking in token economics, and all this holistic thinking and the network thinking and complexity theory, and really put those together. And I think you get a new economic paradigm when you do that. But I agree with you, as you say, most of it's actually just perpetuating old logic. But there is niche stuff going on. I'll share some links now with you so you can take a look at that.
Thank you. Floor is open, but if I get 15 seconds of silence, I'm going to let us move on.
I think Millie has.
Yeah,
Millie, yeah, sorry.
Yeah,
Please.
I just wanted to come back to what Zenda said about decolonizing, because I think some of course, you know, the big complex systems maps and everything is not something that indigenous people necessarily have access to. But I think there is something about, you know, when you asked why is this so, why is it not more, why is more not happening, you know, and I wrote it involves capabilities we're not trained in, it values things we're not taught to value, as Zenda said. But those are things that we've been taught in, you know, a kind of Western paradigm, where a lot of this is also about unlearning. It's also about dismantling institutions that we've built that are different from other cultures, where, you know, that may in some ways be closer to systems thinking. I don't want to glorify things, but right now I'm doing a project around people-centered justice and transforming justice systems. And, you know, it's like doing work in Nigeria on shifting from an institution-focused justice system to a people-centered justice system, when people-centered justice is what they had before the Europeans imposed the European justice institutions. And so it's a bit contradictory to come now and talk about people-centered justice there. So I just think this decolonizing piece is quite important. And I don't know if any of you have children at the international school in Geneva, but my 14-year-old goes there, and they've been doing this work around decolonizing the curriculum, and they've been putting out different videos about decolonizing the curriculum, different topics. So decolonizing history, decolonizing geography, decolonizing science. And I found the decolonizing economics one really interesting and very courageous. And they talk about donut economics, and they say this is we're teaching it as if it's a new paradigm, but actually many cultures, it's very connected to what many cultures original economic thinking and original economic practices were. So this is old wisdom for others, whereas we're presenting it as a new theory. So I think if we work with systems thinking, this is really important for us to have humility around, and not to see systems thinking as something that comes from the West.
Yeah, good point. Did I see Marla? Did you have your hand up, or was that just a missed key? I'm not sure. Okay. There, Jonathan, hi. Floor is yours.
Everyone, can you hear me well?
A little bit of static.
A bit of static? Okay, well, sorry about that. I just want to reiterate a question I put in the chat, which is basically what would be some concrete, a concrete mission for this organization beyond capacity building? Because of course systems, the universe is a system, and I mean, we can talk about everything. I wondered if there was anything more specific that people wanted to address, and basically if people wanted to share what their personal mission with systems is, I think that would be interesting. Thanks.
It's a great lead in. I think you're asking, where are we going to go, in a sense, and we've all been discussing that, so some of the rest of us may want to weigh in on that too, but that will be part of some of our subsequent meetings, is to find out whether people want to get into specific initiatives, things that either generate action or that expose us to how other people are working, or I think that it's quite open in the establishment of this hub. So those of us who are there already have some ideas, but the hub is really open to develop those ideas. Not a single idea. It's a collaboration space. So I don't know if any of the rest of you who are part of the hub already want to weigh in on Jonathan's question, but that's how I would interpret it, Jonathan.
So yes, maybe I think there is the dimension, of course, to create the community and how far we want to be for the local community, or even up to Switzerland. And in parallel to that, there is also an interesting part, because there is 20 hubs and there will be more. There is very interesting dimension of the global network that it can bring the local community versus the global network. And when we would like, if we want to move from the creation step on experimentation, there is a true value added of a very accessible network, different hub, and we are in different projects, one with technologies, the other with the food system, and there is a connectivity between people from the local to the global, and I think it's a true value added of the system innovation.
Yeah, maybe I'll add something there. I mean, there's certain evolution in the network, I think, and with the hubs from maybe more communications and information and learning and education, and over time transitioning to more kind of concrete projects. But just kind of some of the stuff we're starting to explore. I mean, the network's really young at this stage, but some of the stuff we've been doing is thinking about co-creations, where we get, we have a lot of canvases and templates for running workshops and so on. So we take a challenge. For example, in India, they took the topic of reimagining higher education in India. And then we run like a 90-minute session and we get people together, particularly people who this is relevant for, like the business school there in Mumbai, and get them to work through a canvas. Actually, one of them, a popular one we use is the one that Andrew just showed you about the multi-level perspective for transition to food, regenerative agriculture he showed you. So we do sessions like that where we're starting to actually use those canvases as spaces for bringing people together and for thinking about what these transition processes might look like, or how do we put a problem there in the center and then work around that in terms of who the stakeholders, what are the kind of blockages, what are the leverage points and so forth. So at this stage, those are still ideation processes. So it's really just coming up with initial ideas around how might we tackle these kind of problems, or what might this transition look like. And that's the initial phase, I'd say. But over time, you're transitioning towards actually how do you get the stakeholders together, and more substantial in terms of how do we actually implement those? How do we actually follow through with that process? So that's kind of the direction we're going. But obviously, things just getting started at this stage.
Yeah, if I can just add something, like just very briefly on top of that. Yeah, I've been working with systems innovation for a little while and seeing kind of the few hubs kind of launch up as well. And I think picking up on what I think Millie was saying before about this kind of experiential side to systems thinking. I mean, the bit that actually makes it real. I think the hubs is kind of really about bringing a lot of this theory and a lot of the great content that systems innovation has, and then helping to introduce it to a local context and see how this kind of grows when it is applied in a community setting on a local level. So this is part of kind of, I guess, the mission as well.
Because in my experience in trying to apply these ideas, I find when you try and actually get into the weeds of stuff, it's often quite difficult to really apply some of the concepts. And I think I find it great, in order to understand the theory better, to try and apply it to concrete cases. It's just, in my experience, I think it's a great way to further understanding and to generate enthusiasm for and knowledge about systems thinking in general. So that was kind of why I was wondering about that.
Good, thank you. So we've just got a couple minutes left. I just want to point out that we have some messages in the chat, including, I was just chatting with Marla. She said regarding fintech, I think that is interesting, new ecosystem in Geneva linking finance to the SDGs, and she put a link in there. I want to give people, anyone who hasn't had a chance to speak, who has something they want to contribute, or any final words, now's your opportunity. We've got just a couple minutes left. So anyone who hasn't said anything yet, please, the floor is open to you. Yes,
thank you very much to do that. Really, I enjoyed it very much, and I'm looking forward to more events. And I will really try to be on as much as I can, because it's so important that the systems thinking and systems innovation is really brought to the whole innovation community. So yeah.
Great.
Look, happy to provide more in other meetings, of course.
Thank you for speaking. Anyone else who hasn't spoken yet would like to say something?
So maybe we just mention next events coming up, Andrew,
Yep.
and I put a link in there in the chat.
Yep. So let's go to that, and just put a link in the chat if you haven't seen it. And I think will we make the chat available? We should make it available somehow, I guess. But the next event, June 8th, 5 p.m. You'll find details on the LinkedIn channel, and the link that Joss put in there, I think will probably take you there. I haven't tested it yet, but and you're welcome to join us and joining the hub in general. It's about developing some of these ideas that we've talked about as I think in the direction that Jonathan is maybe indicating, going down some paths that are concrete or in different directions that might be of interest to people who are part of the hub. Let me stop. I don't want to say any more now. I'm really happy to see you all here. And I'd like to give last opportunity to any of my colleagues who would like to say something before we close.
No, I think just what you said is that before the next meeting, feel free to contact us if you want to take part on having a better discussion about more details. I think we are open. We have regular weekly discussion. Feel free to join even before the meeting if you want to take part to our story.
Great, thank you. Joss, Bowen, Kevin.